So today is the appearance day of Gadadhara Pandit. For most of the world, for most of the world of ISKCON, today's a pretty small day. Hardly shows up on the Vaishnava calendar. If you go to most temples, I'd argue, every temple except for ours in the US, they don't have a festival today. Most temples in India won't. There is a Gadadhara Parivar, a lineage of Gaudiya Vaishnavas that traces their lineage through Gadadhara Pandit. For them, today's a big day. But for ISKCON, which isn't part of the Gadadhara Parivar, and for most Gaudiya Vaishnava temples within our sect, our few tens of millions of followers, today is not a big day. We have lots of Vaishnava holidays. Practically speaking, every other day, some saint was born. If you want to really follow it proper, you fast till noon on the appearance day of every single person. Then you follow a Ekadasi for the rest of the day, so no grains or beans. And then you got to eat the next day. And the next day is another fasting day. It gets even more complicated. You got to stagger your fasting days, because on certain days like Dvadasi, you have to eat grains. So anybody who was born on Dvadasi, you got to fast for them the previous day on Ekadasi, so that when the 12th day comes, our calendar is a lunar calendar. So we got 15 days up and 15 days down. And so the moon gets bigger for 15 days, it's a full moon. Then the moon gets smaller for 15 days, and it's a new moon, no moon. And it gets bigger and then smaller. I never noticed this my whole childhood. You look up in the sky and you'd see the sun looking different ways, but I never realized it was one kala, one sliver growing till it's full, and then one kala, one sliver disappearing until it's new. I never noticed that. Until I joined the Hare Krishna movement and learned what panjikas are and our traditional calendars, and then, figured it out. So on the 12th day of both the waxing and the waning moon, when the moon's getting bigger and the moon's getting smaller, so twice a month, there's Ekadasi. But the next day is Dvadasi, and on Dvadasi you have to break fast. You can't fast. You have to eat grains. So if there's a fasting day on Dvadasi, you can't fast on Dvadasi because you got to break fast. You got to break fast in the morning time, at a certain time in the morning time. And so then you have to follow the day before. You have to fast the day before. Anyway, if you add all this stuff up, practically speaking, you spend half your life. Of course, then there's also fasting during Chaturmas, so that adds some new things. That's 4 months, different kinds of fasting you're doing during those 4 months. And so when you add it all up, pretty much you spend most of your life, over half of your year, in some form of half-day fast. In some ways, the best thing you do is just get into intermittent fasting. And that way, just automatically every day you fast till 12 anyway. And if you want to dehydrate yourself a little bit, it's even better. There's another thing, is that, we think of fasting as, I don't know what you guys think, but I think of fasting as fasting from food and water. So on Ekadasi, you're supposed to fast from food and water and sleep. So you're supposed to stay up all night on Ekadasi. Fasting day means food and water until the break fast, at which point you can drink water and eat anukalpa, like simple fruits and roots, but Ekadasi prasad, but nothing with grains in it. So when you add all this stuff together, up together, you're definitely in some form of fast, and severe dehydrating fast for half the year or more. And so, any given day of the week, there's somebody's appearance day, somebody's disappearance. We celebrate the birth and death anniversary, so that just doubles it up right there. And somebody's appearance day, somebody's disappearance day. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. Then in addition to the generic days, you have the days of your specific lineage, which from the time of Mahaprabhu is going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 generations have passed, depending on which lineage you're from. So that's another 30 days you got to observe. That's a month right there. Just the appearance and disappearance day of all the acharyas in your lineage. And there's a universally accepted ones from all the lineages, and like I said, it's substantial. Gadadhara Pandit, practically speaking, is a not super minor, but definitely not a major player in most ISKCON temples. They just don't follow it. Here it's a big day for us. Super big day for us. Because we have the only deity of Gadadhara Pandit that's installed in a temple in the continental U.S. They got one in Hawaii, but that's not the continental U.S. It's a little island that somehow slipped in to the U.S. Like Puerto Rico plus, Guam plus, something like that. American Samoa plus. But it's not the continental U.S. So there it is. We got the only deity in the continental U.S. As such, we consider Gadadhara Pandit to be really important. And so we cooked a nice feast. We dress the deities super nice. We fast today. We feast today. We do kirtan. We pull it together and do a little program. And so, normally it's a small program. So if we get, on a normal appearance day program, 100 to 150 people. On a small one, we'll get, 50 to 75. And because of COVID now, it's just hardly anybody. It's a tiny little crew. You guys are the crew, and some people online. Anyway, Gadadhara Pandit, I think, represents an intermediate tattva, or truth, in our tradition. Not something we teach to brand spanking new people. It's just a little too complicated. It's built on too many axioms. And so you got to take some years to learn the basics, the building blocks of our tradition. And then from that, you can catapult, springboard, jump off, and appreciate Gadadhara Pandit. But if you try too early on, you just end up confounding people, and it creates more questions than it answers. So I'm going to do my best to sort through for you guys something sequential and relatively comprehensive and digestible about Gadadhara Pandit. And I'm going to try not to leave out some of the beautiful stuff too. I want to get all of it. So, as far as my intelligence will allow, there's about 4 different ways that you can view Gadadhara Pandit. And they're all important. And they all highlight different things that have been codified and preserved in our tradition. And so if you're equipped with these 4 lenses, then you can look at Gadadhara Pandit and you can see Gadadhara Pandit through the eyes of our tradition. Without one of these lenses, you end up with something that doesn't fit. And the different lenses are paradoxical. Paradox is an unexplained contradiction that does have an explanation or a harmonization, but you can't figure it out, so we call it a paradox. It's different than a straight contradiction because there is a resolution, but certainly paradoxes to the uninitiated look like contradictions. And I would say that some of these lenses are difficult to reconcile with one another. First thing, if you want to understand Gadadhara Pandit, is you should view him as a Vaishnav saint. You should view him as a Vaishnav saint. So Gadadhara Pandit was a Vaishnav that lived 500 years ago, grew up in West Bengal, moved to Jagannath Puri, was a lifelong celibate monk, a brahmachari, never took sannyas per se and became a big bishop in our movement, but did remain as a lifelong brahmachari. He was a spiritual savant. He was a pujari. He worshipped a very famous deity in Odisha called Tota Gopinath, in Jagannath Puri called Tota Gopinath. He took a vow never to leave Jagannath Puri, which is called Kshetra Sannyas. You give up the world and reside in one holy place and never leave the confines of that holy place. There was only one time since he took that vow for his whole life he ever left that holy place. He was a Pandit. He spoke and taught the Bhagavatam. And he has a lineage of disciples. Not a seminal lineage where he had children and those children became renowned Vaishnavas because he was a monk. You've been signed out because your account is signed in from another device. Okay? Diana, give me a thumbs up if you can still hear me. All right, great. Just not going to worry about it. So yeah, that's one way to understand Gadadhara Pandit. He was like Srila Prabhupada, or like your guru. He was a great Vaishnava from 5 centuries ago, born in Bengal like so many of our Vaishnavas, retired to Jagannath Puri, again like so many of our Vaishnavas from around that time, was part of the Bhakti Renaissance movement, was a big speaker of the Bhagavatam, taught many famous Vaishnavas, the Bhagavatam, chose to remain as a brahmachari, a kind of junior monk, although he was a senior monk, he chose to remain as a junior monk. Sometimes this happens. Someone will not take sannyas because they're just so humble and so meek. They don't want to take on that big responsibility, and so they stay in the lesser position. They're more than a sannyasi, they're more than a renunciate, but they chose to live as a brahmachari for their whole life. And so he was like that. And he was a pujari. He had a very special relationship with a deity called Tota Gopinath, was the pujari there. Okay? So that's I don't know for sure, I never looked it up, but I'm assuming Tota Gopinath means Tata Gopinath, and Tata means the seashore, and so it's Gopinath who lives by the seashore, and it's a name for the deity because he was from Jagannath Puri on the eastern seaboard of India, and so they named him after the seashore on which he resided. Do you guys follow that? I'll Google it later, but that's my assumption of what it is. No? You shook your head no.
I think Tota means garden. Tota means garden. So I think
garden. Okay, so the garden. So he's in a garden.
This is what I've heard. I'm not sure.
You heard it? I'm guessing it's Tata Gopinath became Tota Gopinath. I'll Google it later, but it's either garden or it's by the seashore. I'm still sticking with the seashore, but I could be wrong. And normally I would just pull out my phone and look it up, but I'm just going to go with it. So yeah, he had a relation with this deity, and a very beautiful deity in Jagannath Puri, a famous deity. And that's it. He was, lived and died, and spread the holy name around, and taught people, and had many fine qualities, one of which was extreme humility. That's a great way to understand Gadadhara Pandit. It's totally accurate, and if you don't understand that, you won't really be able to make sense of Gadadhara Pandit, who walked this earth 5 centuries ago, worshipped the deity. The deity's still there, has a bunch of disciples. The disciples are still around. And, it's just, there's no way to really appreciate him without understanding this aspect of him. Do you follow that? Okay. The second way to understand Gadadhara Pandit is pretty much in direct opposition to the first. It's pretty much in direct opposition to the first. The second way to understand Gadadhara Pandit is Radharani. Gadadhara Pandit is an incarnation of Radharani. Like Radha Krishna, that Radha came down in a male form 5 centuries ago and walked this planet. Now, is it possible for an angel in a spiritual form to come down from heaven and walk on this earth? How would it be possible for a spiritual being to walk on this earth? The very nature of spirit is distinct from matter. Spirit is invisible. It's non-corporeal. It's the opposite of matter. You follow? Ghosts don't walk on this earth. They kind of float around because they lack a body. You follow? They're made out of mind or whatever. I mean, I guess I'm using the idea of ghosts as an axiom. You might not believe in ghosts, but I couldn't think of anything else. But if something doesn't have a body, how does it walk around? You follow? Is it possible for an angel to come down into this world in a form made out of spirit and walk around in a form that you can see and touch as a material being? You want to say yes?
I'm just thinking Krishna does that, so why not?
Because Krishna is omnipotent. So if you want to say, can Krishna do it? Krishna is omnipotent. So certainly Krishna could do that because that's the very meaning of the word omnipotence. Are angels omnipotent? So could an angel do that? What do you think? Do you understand the contradiction? Are you following this? You spaced out. You spaced out.
No, I understand.
So what's your response? Yeah?
I think yes, that just because we don't understand the spiritual body in the same way we understand the material body doesn't mean that the spiritual body isn't here for us to see and interact with. We think it looks the same as the material body, but it isn't. We just can't comprehend.
I have no clue what you're saying or how it's an answer to what I said. As far as my intelligence will allow, what you said has nothing to do with what I just said. You want to try again? Just do it loud so I have to repeat you. By the way, I'm being a little bit disingenuous. I do understand what you're trying to say. You just did an extremely bad job of expressing yourself. And so it's like not worth me having to just totally fix what you said. So you got to at least do something.
Okay, thank you. A spiritual body can be present.
It's like if you ask somebody like, hey, could I have a glass of water? And they take water, throw it on themselves. And I'm like, does that count? You're like, no, that doesn't count. Like, I maybe give you credit if you get a few drops in the glass, but if you're just dunking your face in a bucket of water and you don't bother, you got to do something that resembles an answer.
Okay. A spiritual being can be present on this planet. We might think that it's in the same way as a material body when we see it because it looks the same. However, just because it looks the same doesn't mean that it actually is the same, and the spiritual body is present just in a different way than we can materially conceptualize.
Yeah. You did a better job of explaining it. Now I'll respond. My very understanding of spirituality is that your consciousness is a non-material thing. Therefore, your consciousness does not occupy space. It's not limited by the laws of physics, the same way all matter is. Therefore, it's eternal. So the whole nature of the idea of spirit of consciousness as distinct from matter is precisely that it does not occupy space and time. And is not subject to things like gravity and entropy, which is what allows somebody to walk around here and have their body grow old and decay. Now he said Krishna can walk around. I said Krishna is omnipotent. Therefore, omnipotence would mean that God would be able to, through omnipotence, descend into this world and walk around, and if he wanted to, make himself in a form that you could see or not, and he'd be able to circumvent this normal, basic, dualistic distinction between spirit and matter. But that doesn't necessarily pertain to an angel. Your response seemed to have ignored all of those things which were already established in the discussion. It's almost like you weren't here for the entire preceding discussion, and you forced us to start all over again because you just skipped over everything that the debate had built up to. Did you follow this? Like if you're playing a game of chess, and you make a few moves, and now the table looks a certain way, and there's certain moves that are now, it's a critical thing. You go, hey, how would you move? And you'd be like, oh, I just like, and you gotta move all the pieces back, just gotta move like that. You go all the way back to the beginning. You just force the entire discussion to go back to the beginning. Did you follow that? What's your response?
I agree.
Okay, more answers? Yeah. Let's go. I want to move forward, and you really pulled me backwards. So I'm just going to go ahead and call on the person I think has the best likelihood of answering the question, and that is going to be Nick.
So I think you're tricking us by saying angel at the beginning. Isn't Radharani not an angel? Like she's also omnipotent?
There you go. Simple answer. I tricked you by saying angel. And then when you said Krishna, I gave you the answer. You gave the answer. I told you what your answer meant. You meant, well, Krishna can do it. You didn't bother explaining why. I then told you because Krishna's omnipotent. I handed you the answer, and there's your answer. Let's say, could an angel walk? Because when Krishna comes down, he does bring a lot of angels with him. Gadadhara might not be one of them. She might be Radharani, who's functionally non-different than Krishna. For the purpose of this discussion, Radharani is Krishna. She is the feminine half of the deity. Krishna is both masculine and feminine, and his feminine side is called Radharani, but she's actually functionally non-different from Krishna. Our conception of divinity is Radha and Krishna together. God in love. Radharani and Krishna together, united. Did you follow this? Therefore, Radharani is omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, the source of all existence, etc., etc. But now just ask my question again. Many of the angels came down and they did walk. How do we explain that? By the grace of an omnipotent Supreme Lord, as part of his traveling entourage, Krishna could not only circumvent those laws for himself, but he could also circumvent them for his various angels and allow them to miraculously appear in this world in a way that was discernible and visible and left a footprint. In fact, you could argue that an omnipotent and omnibenevolent deity would do such a thing, because without doing such a thing, you would have no glimpse into the nature of heaven and the nature of what was possible for the soul. Therefore, God would have to come down into this world periodically with his eternal associates to put on a play or stage events that gave you a glimpse through the portal of this material world, so you would get a glimpse of transcendence, such to awaken that desire within you and give you an impetus to want to move forward. And so it's perfectly reasonable that an all-powerful God could do that, and it's perfectly reasonable that an all-good God would want to do that, and there it is. And so on the coattails of what's true for Krishna, And therefore, Radharani, we can even get our angels in the door. Do you guys follow that? Okay. Good. This isn't particularly complex. It does require some critical thinking skills applied to our tradition. Do you follow this? Angels have a body made out of spirit. This is like Scala Naturi. This is like traditional, Christology and stuff, going back 2,000 years. So therefore they can't interface with the world. But there's certainly just no reason where that has to be the case if you're dealing with omnipotent deity. And therefore it could be that angels do appear in this world and walk incognito through this world. Why would God do such a weird thing? Perhaps to inspire or uplift humanity at regular intervals because of our natural tendency towards entropy. You following this, Damodar? Okay. All right. So Gadadhar is Radharani. All right, and that's okay. Radharani could come down here, and the angels could even come down here. Problem is, if Gadadhar is Radharani, isn't kind of the distinction between a devotee and the deity that one of them is a small devotee, a soul of this world, and the other one is the omnipotent deity? And therefore, if the first lens is to view Gadadhar as a devotee, like all of us, then it would be preposterous and even offensive to say that Gadadhar is Radharani, because the critical distinction between God and the soul, at least in our tradition, is never circumvented. We are individual souls, sparks of the divine, but we are never the original fire. So how do we simultaneously postulate that Gadadhar is a devotee and Gadadhar is simultaneously Radharani? Not even like Vishnu, Radharani, like the absolute zenith, the original apex predator, like the original apex divinity. How do you then do that? Like, how does that make sense? It'd be like saying Prabhupada is Radharani. Like how do you even do that? It's like, it's so contrary to how we've been trained. So how do you reconcile that? Yeah, loud and proud. Get it right.
You had mentioned that God is all good and therefore He's all grateful, and so you'd also mentioned that He comes to teach us, or she comes to teach us an example and to teach us.
All right, you got the answer. Excellent. Gadadhar is not a devotee. Gadadhar is Radharani. Radharani playing as a devotee. Do you follow this? So when we say Gadadhar is Radharani, or Gadadhar is a devotee, we don't really mean that. We mean that Gadadhar is Radharani coming into this world to show us a superlative example of how devotees who wish to achieve romantic love for Krishna should act. Did you follow that? Gadadhar is Radharani coming into this world to give us a superlative example of how devotees who wish to achieve romantic love for Krishna should act. Like if the king chooses to go into the street and pretend to be a regular citizen, to walk around his kingdom incognito, is the king actually just a random citizen? No, they're still the king. They are pretending to be a random citizen for some divine purpose, and this one would be to set a superlative example for all of us to follow. Right? All right, we reconciled that, right? Oh, we're halfway there. We got 4, and we've done 2. Have you learned anything yet? We got 4, we've learned 2, but I've got an extra special bonus prize. So we really got 5 things. We're not even halfway there yet. Have you learned something? Have you felt challenged? Like you learned something that you didn't know before? Good. We're going to keep moving. We're going to keep moving forward. Okay? The third understanding is that Gadadhara isn't Radharani because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radha Bhava Dyuti Suvalitam. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is adorned with, Suvalitam means adorned with, Radha, Bhav, and Dyuti, with Radharani's complexion and sentiments. Now Radharani is ecstatic love personified. Radharani is ecstatic love personified. Therefore, if you take away Radharani's ecstatic love, what's left? Nothing. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in our tradition, is described. Radharani's golden. Mahaprabhu's golden. He's Gaur Govinda. He's Govinda, Krishna, but he's golden. Radharani is known as Gaurangi, the feminine golden-limbed one. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Gauranga. He is the masculine golden-limbed one. Same name. So if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani, does it work having two Radharanis in one pastime? Doesn't work. We just don't do it. There's no need. Our deities are logical. And so there's always a reason for everything which happens. And so if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani, then Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani, and there's no need for another Radharani in the pastime. So, if Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani, then Gadadhara becomes the empty shell that's left, having donated her very essence to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Radharani loves Krishna so much, she does everything for Krishna. And so when Mahaprabhu came, in order to experience the love of his devotees, this again is an axiom. To appreciate the point I'm trying to make, you have to have an axiom in play. You have to understand a core teaching in our tradition. The core teaching is actually taken from Indian dramaturgy. Indian dramaturgy is not plot-based, where you have a plot that moves forward and the character moves forward on the hero's journey. Rather, Indian drama is based on relishing various relationships. And so in an Indian dramatic performance, you could have a woman standing in front of a stage, looking at her child and crying, and the entire act could be the woman crying while looking at her child in order to draw out maternal feelings in the audience without much plot. The primary purpose of Indian drama, which also has a plot, is to draw out emotion. It's called rasa theory. That the purpose of drama is to evoke emotion. Also called catharsis, actually, in Greek. It's not like there's no Greek equivalent. But you could have a scene which is a mother looking at a child, and that's it. That's the entire scene. You find this, they have something called a pageant of the masters in Laguna Beach. It's a famous art festival. They have famous paintings, and then they have actors stand there, and they pull the stage back, and there's live actors in a live enactment of a painting. So they just stand there frozen. But all the actors, perfectly in costume, to make the painting on a living canvas. You follow? And they just stand there, and people look, and they pay a bunch of money. So it's right down the road. It's called the Pageant of the Masters. And they have a big outdoor theater, and they do it all summer long. They didn't do it last year for the first time ever because of COVID, but otherwise it's huge. And they sell like really expensive tickets, and the theater remains relatively empty for the rest of the year, even though it's on ridiculously expensive real estate. So, the theory is based on a concept called Ashray and Vishai. The Ashray is the lover. The Vishai is the beloved. Love exists. I feel love for you based on your personal qualities. You are an individual with certain personal qualities. I then love you according to your personal qualities. You can never know what it's like for me to love you because love is experienced on a backdrop of distinction between the lover and the beloved. And the beloved never knows what it's like to love themselves. They have whatever their personal qualities are, but the lover uniquely is allowed to experience love of the beloved, and therefore love is always relational, built on a backdrop of difference, and it's a unifying force between two people that ties them together. But it forever requires there to be two. If there's no mother and child, there's no love between them. Did you follow that? That's a critical axiom to be able to understand Indian drama and our theology. Therefore, Radharani loves Krishna impossibly, so much. She's the best lover of Krishna that could ever exist. And she loves Krishna so much, it makes Krishna think, she looks so ecstatic. It must be that I have certain qualities in me that I don't even fully understand. Because even though I'm omnipotent and omniscient, it's like if Krishna's omnipotent, can he make a square circle? No. Because a square circle doesn't exist. It's just a contradiction. Krishna can make anything which exists, but a square circle simply does not exist. Because a square is not a circle, and a circle is not a square. So can Krishna make a square circle? No, he also can't make a gobbledygook. Why? Because I don't know what a gobbledygook is. I just made up the word. You follow? Does this make sense? This is the idea of a deity that's translogical, not illogical. And so, for 1,000 years or more, theologians have argued quite strongly that it's ridiculous to ask God to be able to do impossibilities. And they just dispense with a whole host of, skeptical questions on this basis, that it's just unreasonable to ask for Krishna to be able to make a contradiction. And so when you say Krishna is omniscient or omnipotent, it means he can do or know everything which can be known. Can Krishna know the future? Well, if you have a deterministic conception of time, that everything in the future exists in the same way the past does, then Krishna could fully know the future. However, the future exists as a realm of possibility, but doesn't actually exist yet, because the future depends on our free will as a synergistic element of reality. Then Krishna can't possibly know the future in the same way he knows the past. He could know the future, let's say, as the totality of potentialities and possibilities that could happen, and all of them, billions upon billions, times billions, times billions, times billions, ad infinitum. But if the future doesn't exist in the same way the past does, it's totally reasonable to say Krishna does not know the future like he knows the past. Follow that? If you don't say that, you're saying that we live in a deterministic world, and now all bad things that ever happen to anybody are Krishna's fault because there's no such thing as free will. Like I said, some of these things, if you know them already, then the class makes more sense. Otherwise, we've got to stop, say them really fast, and then move forward. And it kind of guts the flow of the class. You follow? That's why it's important to have these kind of backgrounds. It's like if people know how to march and you're a captain in the military and you want to tell them, here's how we're going to march and here's what we're going to do. And they already know the basic movements. You can put it together really fast. They don't know how to march. You got to keep going back. No, that's not how you march. It's like this and it's like this. And you got to just keep going back. And you can't do any like higher level stuff because you got to keep building the lower stuff. Are you guys following me? Krishna can't know what it's like to love himself. And that's logical and reasonable. And it does not contradict Krishna being omniscient and omnipotent, save and except for he cannot do impossible things, such as fully know himself. And therefore the Supreme Lord wondered, what in eternity, what would it be like? What's it like for Radharani? And that's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And therefore Gadadhara Pandit donates her sentiments to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Radharani is left as a beggar in the street, penniless, robbed of her very essence, like a ghost, like an empty shell, having given everything to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And that is why Gadadhara Pandit, who normally has the fiery mood of Radharani, is so meek. Generally speaking, Radharani never gives up her fiery mood. In fact, when Radharani goes to Dwarka, instead of being the queen of Vrindavan, she becomes the second queen in Dwarka. Who's the queen of Dwarka? Rukmini. Who is Rukmini in Vrindavan? See, who said that? Darshan for the win. Chandravali. Avali means collection. Chandra of moons. She's so beautiful, she's like a festival of moons. Chandravali is Radharani's competition in Vrindavan. She plays second fiddle to Radharani in Vrindavan. But Chandravali becomes the queen of Dwarka, because queens should be submissive to their kings. And Radharani will never be submissive to Krishna. And therefore Radharani becomes Satyabhama, a secondary queen. She can't give up her fiery nature. She'll never give up her fiery nature, even though it means she can't be the queen of Dwarka. This is why we say that Rukmini Dwarkadish, they are not Rukmini and Dwarkadish. They are Radha and Krishna. We just call them Rukmini Dwarkadish, but we are worshiping Krishna in Vrindavan. When Prabhupada installed them, he installed them as Radha and Krishna deities. Now, of course, Radha and Krishna contain all other forms. Where does Chandravali come from? She comes from Radharani. All of the gopis and queens and Lakshmis are all avatars of Radharani. She's the original feminine divinity, and every single feminine form that's ever existed, just like Krishna incarnates, Radharani incarnates side by side. But what happens when Krishna becomes Radharani? There's no place for her. So there's a Sita to a Ram. You follow? There's a Lakshmi to a Narasimha. You get it? You get it, right? There's a Bhumi to Varaha. Bhumi's the earth, who's like the wife of Varaha. You get it? You're following this, right? But then what happens when Krishna becomes Radharani? There's no place. And so Gadadhara gave herself, Radharani gave herself to Krishna. So much so that another miracle occurred. Radharani, who never gave up her fiery nature ever before, became meek and humble. And that explains why Radharani is meek and humble, and Gadadhara is always described as being meek and humble. Remember how I mentioned how meek and humble Gadadhara was? That wasn't by accident. I was foreshadowing. So when I made this point, you guys would have that in your minds. You with me? That's 3. See how it got way more complicated on that third one? The first 2 are like a full-on contradiction, and you guys were pretty vexed. Although Nick came in for the save. Probably because he listened carefully to what I was saying, because I gave the answer away. But you guys just didn't grasp it. I didn't make it that hard. You just had to be a good listener. I didn't try to ask you a question you'd have to know the answer to. I gave you the answer without telling you, and then asked you. So all I really need is for you guys to listen carefully. But the third one was complicated. Who's Gadadhara Pandit? A Vaishnava. Who's Gadadhara Pandit? Radharani. Is Gadadhara Pandit a Vaishnava? No. Gadadhara Pandit is playing the part of a Vaishnava. Still Radharani. Who's Gadadhara Pandit? Radharani, robbed of her sentiments. How can Radharani be robbed of her sentiments? Because she has nothing else. She is her love for Krishna. Why was she robbed of her sentiments? Because Chaitanya Mahaprabhu plundered them and stole them. This is the language of Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Dev Goswami Maharaj, Prabhupada's esteemed godbrother, who was very, very brilliant and spoke in this kind of sensationalized language about Gadadhara Pandit, and really gave a gift to the world of explaining stuff which was vexing in our Gaudiya literatures about why Gadadhara had a humble mood. It just didn't make any sense. And so he took the trouble to explain this in such a way where that thing that didn't fit of why Gadadhara had such a humble mood, a Dakshin Swabhav. Dakshin means orthodox, as opposed to a Vama Swabhav. Vama means a left wing versus a right wing mood. And so Radharani has a Vama Swabhav, but Gadadhara's spoken of as having that Dakshin Swabhav. But that's Chandravali, that's Rukmini, it's never Radharani. You follow? And he explained this in the way I just explained to you. And now Radharani becomes even more wonderful. She loves Krishna so much, she gives her very self to Krishna and waits. And for this, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada's guru's guru, he said one time, I want to do my bhajan in Kurukshetra. Vrindavan is for shallow people. When Prabhupada's godbrother, Sridhar Maharaj, heard this, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, Prabhupada's guru, mentioned this, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that Vrindavan is for shallow thinkers. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was Bhaktivinoda Thakur's son, but there was a guru in between them. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati was talking, and he was saying that my father said that Vrindavan is for shallow thinkers. And Prabhupada's godbrother Sridhar Maharaj was there, and he said when he heard this, he felt like he'd fallen out of a tree on his head. He felt concussed and bewildered. And Srila Sridhar Maharaj was a brilliant, brilliant Vaishnava. For him to feel like he fell out of a tree on his head is just inconceivable to me. He was so brilliant. Vrindavan is for shallow thinkers. I want to go to Kurukshetra to do my bhajan. Because in Kurukshetra, the Brajvasis finally came to see Krishna after so many decades, after Krishna left Vrindavan and broke their hearts. And Krishna appeared there on a Rath Yatra cart, and they meekly and feebly tried to drag Krishna back to Vrindavan, unsuccessfully. Their hearts were breaking because they finally saw Krishna after so long, but they could not actually engage with him. And so their separation was more than it had ever been previously, because they came so close to seeing Krishna again, but they were denied. And that's Rath Yatra. We celebrate that. Radharani and the gopis coming and trying to drag Krishna back to Vrindavan when he's sitting in his chariot. That's Jagannath Rath Yatra. That's our celebration. We have Jagannath in every temple in ISKCON. That's why they're there, because this is a huge part of our tradition. Jagannath Puri, the Jagannath deities, the Rath Yatra celebration. This is a huge kind of secret and fundamental part of our tradition, is relishing and thinking about this. And our pastimes with Radha and Krishna ultimately are insanely tragic. We delight in the tragedy. Because in that tragedy, your heart breaks for Krishna, you cry tears, you feel confused, and the balm and the sweetness of Krishna's mercy descends upon you and harmonizes it all. And so our tradition does something else subversive. We try to cry to Krishna, and that's chanting Hare Krishna. We cry out to Krishna in great agony, and in that we find Krishna. That's another major secret of our tradition. So Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, I want to go to Kurukshetra, because that's where Radharani suffers the most, and I want to serve Radharani the most, when she's suffering the most. When does Radharani suffer the most? In Kurukshetra, right? When was another time that Radharani went to Kurukshetra and suffered? As Gadadhara Pandit, having given her very self to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and therefore devotees of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu have a special love for Radharani in this mood when she's given everything to Mahaprabhu and is a shadow of her former self. Do you guys follow that one? That was part B of 3. You get this now? Who's Mahaprabhu? Who's Gadadhar? A Vaishnava. Who's Gadadhar? Radharani. How do you reconcile that? Radharani playing a Vaishnava. Who's Gadadhar? Radharani with her sentiments plundered, which means her very self. And now she has nothing. And the devotees rush to her. The same way we rush to Radharani in Kurukshetra. And that's one of the great secrets of our tradition, is we reach out and serve these deities in these moments where they're experiencing within infinity these incredibly exalted emotional states, and then we participate in them. Do you guys follow this? I doubt it. I seriously doubt any of you follow what I just taught. But what am I supposed to do? I got like X amount of time. I said it right. I don't imagine you guys followed it. Sorry. It's just there's too many things we're doing. But I think I said it right. I'm listening to myself talk and I'm like, okay, I got that right. And we want to get a little piece each time we hear the Leela. So over the course of decades and a lifetime, eventually sometime we can hold it. Our cup gets deep enough. Every time we hear it, our cup gets a little deeper and a little more sits in it. Like you've heard me give this lecture 12 times. You follow it? More than before. And by the way, if you follow it, you know the easy litmus test for do you follow it? How do we know? What's the easy litmus test, Nick?
If you can explain it again.
Yeah, if you can sit down here right now and explain what I just explained without making mistakes and lay it all out and explain all the different building blocks and the fundamental truths, then you got it. If you just do the simple thing, I'm expecting you guys can at least do this. Vaishnava, Radharani, ergo Radharani playing a Vaishnava, Radharani having given her sentiments, and that's a special thing in our tradition. I'm at least expecting that. But the connection points I don't imagine you'll be able to get. Maybe a couple, but not all of them. And then the last point is Gadadhar is Radharani teaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu how to experience what she experiences. Radharani is a guru to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Who taught Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Bhagavatam? Gadadhar Pandit. Gadadhar Pandit taught Chaitanya Mahaprabhu the Bhagavatam. Wrap your head around that. What is the Bhagavatam? It's the sentiments of the Brijbasis. Which Brijbasi has the most sentiment for Krishna? Radharani. What's the Bhagavatam about? Radharani's romantic love for Krishna. Who taught the Bhagavatam to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Radharani herself in the form of Gadadhar Pandit. Mahaprabhu sometimes would tear at his chest, hearing that Krishna was in his heart, looking for Krishna, tearing at his chest. Who would calm Chaitanya Mahaprabhu down in those moments? Gadadhar Pandit. Gadadhar Pandit had this balm-like, salve-like effect on Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You follow? Those are two different lenses. Gadadhar Pandit with her sentiments plundered. Gadadhar Pandit is teacher. They're two facets of a diamond. They can't actually be relished simultaneously. Do you follow this? They're like, it's an actual contradiction, at least as far as my intelligence will allow. I mean, you could say something like, it was Gadadhar teaching Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by giving her sentiments, but she had enough of them left that she could teach him. You follow? But it's really just two very different ways of looking at the same phenomenon. And the thing is, when you look at the pastime, you find both the submissive mood, but also that Gadadhar was a teacher of Mahaprabhu. So both things are said in our tradition. And they represent two really distinct ways of looking at the world. It stretches your mind. You bounce back and forth. Try to hold them in tension. Try to understand both points. Try to hold them both in your mind. But the very nature of those two visions is that they seem fundamentally contradictory. Radharani is a beggar, Radharani is a teacher. You could try to cram them into the same understanding. That Radharani taught Mahaprabhu by giving her sentiments, but retained enough of herself that she could still teach Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. You follow? But really it's just, you just relish the different pastimes and use the different lenses. The same Srila Sridhar Maharaj, who I mentioned before, a lot of these things I learned by reading his writings. He composed a verse in Sanskrit close to 100 years ago, maybe 80 years ago. Here's the verse. Nilam bodhe tatta. Nilam bodhe tatte. Same word, tatta. Nilam bodhi tatte. On the shore of the blue ocean. Where are we? Jagannath Puri. On the shore of the blue ocean. New Jagannath Puri would be a great name for this temple because we're on the shore of the blue ocean. Sada swa kshepanditam bandavam. The Lord is always feeling separation from himself with his friend. Do you follow this? Srimad Bhagavati Katha Madhiraya Sanjivanam Bhatiyaha. And that friend was one who gave the Lord the wine that gave him life in the form of the Bhagavatam. On the shore of the blue ocean in Jagannath Puri, the Lord is feeling separation from himself. And his friend is there with him. And he's giving him the wine that gives him life again in the form of the Bhagavatam. Who taught Mahaprabhu the Bhagavatam? Gadadhara Pandit. This is a verse about Gadadhara Pandit. With Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was feeling separation from himself, and Gadadhara Pandit was teaching him. You follow? Sada swa nayanashru payanai pujayan. And he was worshipping that Bhagavatam with the sacrificial offering of his own tears. You follow this? You offer various, you offer like sweet rice and stuff like that into a sacrificial fire. It's part of the like old Vedic offerings. And so Gadadhara Pandit was offering puja of his own tears. You follow? So Gadadhara Pandit was famous for teaching the Bhagavatam. Srinivasa Acharya came to learn the Bhagavatam from Gadadhara Pandit, who broke out his manuscript, but his tears had washed away all of the ink from the palm leaf manuscript. He couldn't teach it. He just said, I'm sorry. They said that my tears washed away all the ink. I don't know. And this was like his attempt to teach Srinivasa Acharya, one of our great Vaishnava acharyas. He went there at the end of Gadadhara Pandit's life to learn the Bhagavatam. And Gadadhara Pandit couldn't teach him anything because he tried to read the Bhagavatam to him and the pages were blank because the tears had washed away the pages. So he's offering puja in the form of his own tears. Far out, right? Goswami Prabharo Gadadhar Vibhubhuyat Madekagati. May that best of the Goswamis, Gadadhar, who was a Goswami, may that best of the Goswamis, Radharani, who's the ultimate Goswami, may that Gadadhar Pandit be the object of my life. What a beautiful verse, right? And you see how he weaves together some of these elements, right? The incredible separation that Gadadhar feels in the form of the tears, and also the instructing, and also Radharani. Radharani is hidden, because it says his friend, Bandhava, his friend was there. You follow? Who's Krishna's ultimate friend? Radharani. It's very, very subtle. But Gadadhar is Radharani. Gadadhar as a Goswami, that's a Vaishnava. Gadadhar is teaching Krishna, right? And Gadadhar is feeling incredible separation. All four things are woven into a single verse. Now these four I put together on my own. I never saw these four listed anywhere. This is my own study. And for the first time in my life, and I've read this verse 100 times, I just noticed all four in the verse. Gadadhar Goswami, Goswami Prabharo, a Goswami, a Vaishnava. And Krishna's friend, there's Radharani. And giving the Bhagavatam, there's the teacher. And offering puja, there's the teacher. And crying incessantly, there's the separation. All four items in one verse, because that's our tradition on Gadadhara Pandit. And these different elements are there in a complete explanation. And the third and fourth one are obviously the most ecstatic. And they are, like I said, they're like two facets of a gem. You look at one and you look at the other. You look at one and you look at the other. And you appreciate how amazing the gem is because it has both those facets. The other ones are a little easier to reconcile, but those last two are like, we've earned your trust by explaining our philosophy. You know we're not messing around and we have an actual theology. And now you can just float in it and relish the different facets without thinking too logically about it, so you don't mess up the perfection and the sweetness and the miracle by trying to think through it too much. Did you guys follow that? And the last point, because I said I had 5, remember? So I gave you 4 and did my best to tie them together, and here's number 5. If you really want to understand Gadadhara Pandit, you just have to understand Krishna as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Krishna came to teach us what it was like to be a Vaishnava. So then what does Radharani become? A Vaishnava. Krishna is also coming down to rescue all the jivas. So then who's Gadadhar? Radharani. And they're doing kirtan, and Gadadhar is there, and Krishna's there, and that's the Ras Leela. So when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was Krishna, remember when I said Radha Bhava Jyoti Suvalitam? He's Krishna, he's imbued with the sentiments and the complexion of Radharani. The last verse says, Namami Krishna Sarupam, but he's actually Krishna. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is actually Krishna in the mood of Radharani. And so when Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna, then who's Gadadhar? Radharani. Now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Radharani. So who's Gadadhar? Nothing. But now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu requires some help to be Radharani. So then who does Gadadhar become? A teacher. And so the easy way to find the thread of continuity that ties all of these different things together is to understand who is Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and how chaste is Radharani. That at every moment she's incarnating in a perfect form to serve and augment and give life to and give solace to and give shelter to Krishna. Did you guys follow that one? And we're done. Thank you very much, IGTV. Thank you very much on Facebook and Zoom. Thank you guys so much. Hari Hari Bol.